Yes, Senator Goen. 12 months ago it was Holocaust Memorial Day. We're now 12 months further down the line. We've had another Holocaust Memorial Day. Not a lot has changed in Jersey. Are you satisfied with that we have this annual meeting once a year? 150 people meet for an hour. Is that enough?
Well, firstly, I think it's more than 150 people. I counted well in excess of 200, but maybe I was a little optimistic. But my view is that the fact that Holocaust Memorial Day has taken on such significance in Jersey shows that the community is responsive to issues of human rights and issues surrounding the matters of the Holocaust and of course post-Second World War genocide as well.
In the States this morning, the acting Chief Minister seemed to be quite blasé that he was admitting that Jersey was 20 years behind the United Kingdom on human rights matters, and that didn't seem to matter too much.
Well, I don't think that's what he said. I think what he said was that there's always more that can be done, but that islanders in their hearts are concerned about human rights issues, and legislation will eventually catch up.
I've spoken to the Home Affairs Minister, and he's progressing, and he's quite adamant that anti-discrimination legislation will appear, but that's so fundamental to what Holocaust Day is all about. I mean, it did happen here. People went from Jersey, they went to the extermination camps, and this island was occupied. And as we said 12 months ago, shouldn't that be the stimulus to make things ahead of the United Kingdom, not behind the United Kingdom?
Well, I think it probably is a stimulus. And in fact, if you look at Holocaust Memorial Day remembrance in Jersey today, we do actually trailblaze the UK. We have a major event annually. We now have the Bailiff, the Lieutenant Governor and the Chief Minister all laying wreaths, and the 22 Jersey men and women who perished are appropriately remembered. As far as legislation is concerned, anti-discrimination legislation is absolutely essential, there's no doubt about that, and it does seem to keep getting pushed back. From my early days on the Community Relations Trust, it was one of our early concerns. It will happen, but it seems to be taking a long time, that's for sure.
Certainly, I mean, we're not talking about planning requirements or obligations there, but last year we did discuss in this context about people under the radar who weren't on the radar during the occupation because they were the lesser beings, and we discussed them in the context of now there are lesser beings in Jersey, those without housing qualifications, principally those who live in porta cabins. That falls within the remit of planning, and that's especially your responsibility. But those sort of discrimination, that sort of exploitation, shouldn't you have a louder voice on those sort of issues?
Well, I do try, and you're quite right. There is another class of people in Jersey who unfortunately are below the radar. They're below the radar for all sorts of regulatory reasons, and they don't have the same access to politicians, to state support as many other people have. And that's something that over time we do need to improve. It has improved. The housing regulations have improved over the years, and there is some way to go. But I think we need to be also conscious that anti-discrimination legislation, which the Home Affairs Minister is very keen to bring forward, is something that's quite expensive. And of course it's always seen as something that you can do next year rather than this year. So when you're dealing with very tight budgetary constraints, it tends to be one of those things that gets pushed back. It's a shame, it's not right, but I'm afraid that's a fact of life, dealing with a very tight budget and growing states' need. Much
smaller territories have got to grips with these anti-discrimination laws and signing up to international obligations. The Bailiff talked about hope at the Holocaust Memorial the other day. Are you hopeful at least that these things will be done fairly soon?
I'm more than hopeful. I'm determined that they will be done fairly soon. But what's actually as important is that a spirit of anti-discrimination develops. And I believe that we have progressed enormously in recent decades. And Holocaust Memorial Day is a good example. The Slave Worker Memorial Service at Westmount on Liberation Day is another very good example. Years ago it was unthinkable for many of the establishment officers to attend. Now of course everyone attends, so we have moved forward.
The people who can't attend, those many millions of people who did die in most dreadful circumstances, do you think they'd be satisfied with our progress?
I think they'd be hopeful. I think they'd feel that progress had been made, but I think they'd also be terribly disappointed that there have been so many incidents of genocide post-war, and we only have to look at Rwanda, Darfur, etc.
Thanks, Mr. Yes, Senator Lamarcon, the Minister for Home Affairs. There was discussion in the States today about human rights. It keeps popping up, a lot of talk, but not a great deal of action. What are you going to do for it?
Well, we're doing different things in different areas. Obviously, you have to understand the way that human rights functions is that there's a duty upon all public authorities, all ministers, all courts, all public bodies to operate in accordance with the principles of human rights. If they don't, then they could be liable for damages, for claims and so on and so forth. But this has to actually be worked out in relation to individual cases and the way that things actually happen. It has to be worked out on the ground.
It was said today and there by the acting Chief Minister, and he wasn't too ashamed to say it, that we're 20 years behind the United Kingdom. And he didn't seem too upset about that. That's not satisfactory, is it?
No. One of the things I am working on, as you know, is discrimination Jersey law, which will set up a tribunal which will deal with discrimination matters and will set a base level of what's acceptable behaviour in terms of discrimination. I'm working on that this year in terms of the law, and then obviously after that I've got to look at the different sets of regulations which have got to be brought in to deal with different categories of case. We're going to start with race, and then of course we've got to look at big issues like gender, age, sexual orientation, and I've lost one of the other big areas.
Disability is one of the conventions
that's the one.
that we haven't, even the international convention, we haven't ratified. Discrimination against women, right to the child. There are even the basic ground rules, the conventions themselves, Jersey hasn't ratified. That must be pretty deplorable, mustn't it?
Yeah, we've got some problems in certain areas. For instance, I'm very keen on us ratifying, getting involved with the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, but we have certain specific problems there just because we're a small place. It's difficult to have separate institutions for youngsters who are there on care orders that need to be in a secure place, to have a separate place for people on remand and a separate place for people who've been sentenced by the criminal courts. Particularly we have a problem in relation to girls, because actually we could set up a separate prison for girls and find there was only one person in there.
Yeah, smallness undoubtedly. Smallness is a problem, but small communities do cope. They do around the world. There are smaller places than Jersey have signed up for these conventions.
Yes. The three ministers who are involved with what we're now calling the children's policy, formerly called the corporate parent, are actually very much committed to implementation of the International Convention on the rights of the child. But we have these practical difficulties in a few areas, but we're committed to the principles.
I'm pursuing it especially this week because it was the Holocaust Memorial Day just a few days ago. Yes. 12 months ago it was Holocaust Memorial Day. Yes. 12 months before that it was Holocaust Memorial Day. Not a great deal happens as far as Jersey, and obviously Jersey is very particular to celebrate Liberation Day, Holocaust Memorial Day, because of particular things that happened here, the occupation. Yes. Shouldn't that be the motivator to say, look, these things must be legislated for? This is, it's 65 years ago since the end of the occupation.
Well, all our new legislation has to be human rights compliant. It has to be checked for that. So everything new that's coming in is being subject to this overall check. But obviously, yes, we're a small place. It's difficult for us to have the massive legislation of a much larger country. It's expensive to run, etc., etc. There always will be practical.
The money is available for the finance industry. You've got an agenda for non-discrimination laws. You're trying to bring them in. Have you got the funding?
Yes, I have. For 2011, we've got £100,000 for implementation. We realised that we could actually do this much more practically by having a combined tribunal dealing both with employment matters and with discrimination matters. Well, under the previous proposals, it was proposed that the employment-related discrimination matters would go there anyway, but we were going to end up with two separate tribunals, which would have two lots of experts, etc. So we've put together. 12
months' time, I speak to you, it'll be in place.
The law should be passed, and I hope the first set of regulations, but I think we'll be a little bit beyond that by the time we get it in place.
I should look forward
give me to Easter.